Hi, Andrea.
Good afternoon.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you all?
Great, great. Thank you for joining today. Okay, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. We're at the 12 o'clock hour. So welcome everyone to our 2021 Diversity and Inclusion Summit, Navigating the Future of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. My name is Sierra Pierce. I am the Philadelphia chapter president of National Black MBA Association. And on behalf of the Philadelphia board, we welcome all of you to our first signature event of the year today, this afternoon. We have 3 incredible diversity and inclusion leaders throughout the greater Philadelphia area, each within their own respective industries. And they're going to tell us and talk to us more today about what the future of diversity and inclusion looks like, what the meaning of diversity and inclusion is today, post 2020, as we know a lot has transitioned since 2020, as well as to give us more insight on how navigating in this new environment of DE&I is for professionals, entrepreneurs, students, what that looks like for all of us as we explore career opportunities, investment opportunities, and the like. So really excited to get this conversation started. Just a quick update on the agenda today. Originally, we had planned to do breakout sessions after the panel discussion, which was going to be just the Philadelphia board with the participants. However, due to technology issues, we will not be having the breakout session. So I apologize for that in advance, but I encourage everyone to ask as many questions in the Q&A function, and we will ask that to the panelists after the panel discussion. So another exciting part about today, I'm extremely honored and thankful that Mr. Joseph Handy is with us today to introduce our moderator. Joe Handy is the newly appointed president and chief executive officer of the national chapter of National Black MBA Association. And he so graciously agreed to joining us today to introduce our moderator. So with that, I will hand it over to Joe Handy, who is going to introduce our moderator for today.
Sierra, thank you so much for that introduction. It's an honor and privilege to be with you all today. I'm thankful to participate in this portion of the Diversity and Inclusion seminar. I have the esteemed honor to introduce to you your moderator this afternoon, Suleiman Rahman. He is the CEO of Diverse Force, a strategic capital solutions firm that specializes in cultivating diverse leadership pipelines an inclusive ecosystem across all sectors. Diverse Force partnered with the University of Pennsylvania to develop Diverse Force Onboards, an innovative leadership development program, and trains mid to senior level professionals of color from the public and private sectors to serve more effectively governing boards in the region. Suleiman is a visionary business and civic leader with over 15 years of experience. In 2007, he founded a professional network, UPPN, and quickly made it one of the greater Pennsylvania area's most respected professional networks with well over 18,000 local subscribers and 5,000 active next generation leaders. In the past, Suleiman has served as chairman of the board of directors for the African American Chamber of Commerce, of PA, New Jersey, and Delaware, and has served as a mayor's appointed board member for PIDC, Pennsylvania Industrial Development Corp. In 2016, during the Obama administration, Suleiman was awarded the President's Gold Volunteer Service Award and was appointed to the DNCCs to serve as co-chair of the DNC Volunteer Committee that recruited, trained, and developed well over 10,000 volunteers for Pennsylvania. With that being said, it is my honor once again to introduce to you your moderator, Suleiman Rahman.
Thank you, Joe. You were very kind to read all that bio, and I really appreciate that. It's such an honor to be hosting this event. We thank you for your leadership at the National Black MBA, for gracing us with your presence here for our local chapter here in Philadelphia, as well as our new president, Sierra. Just proud to support the efforts they have. And I'm very, very excited. Been anticipating this conversation with some dynamic leaders in the business sector that is leading DEI efforts and talent management efforts. Most of you have already received an email with their bios. They all have extensive bios and amazing work they've done. So I'm going to briefly kind of introduce our three panelists, and we'll get into the conversation soon. First, I want to welcome Andrea Agnew, who I've known here at Philadelphia is a phenomenal leader in working with Comcast, Spectacor. Andrea is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Comcast Spectacor. In her role, Andrea guides and implements Comcast Spectacor's strategy and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion across all organizations' portfolio, which includes the brands, the Philadelphia Flyers, both business and hockey operations, Wells Fargo Center, Philadelphia Fusion, Philadelphia Wings, and the Maine Mariners. So we want to welcome Andrea Agnew. Second, we want to bring Dawn Fraser Bonner. She's an Executive Vice President of Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She's a Global Vice President, Executive Vice President, and a Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Liberty Mutual Insurance. In her role, Dawn is responsible for leading and design, development and implementation of Liberty Mutual's diversity and inclusion strategy and programs. This includes enhancing employees' DE&I capabilities and skills, internal and external communications, metrics and measurements, benchmarking, external partnerships, and development of employee resource groups. Welcome, Dawn.
Yeah.
Awesome. And last but not least, Yvette Vargas. She's Executive Vice President, Head of Development at Citizens Bank. In Yvette's role, her responsibilities is defining and leading an integrated development strategy that is tied to the broader business agenda. Her direct management function includes talent management, leadership and management development, organizational development, and education and training. Welcome, Yvette.
Thank you.
So we're going to go ahead and get right into the conversation. Again, excited to have each of the panelists actually answer these questions. And we'll start with Andrea, and we'll ask Dawn and Yvette to also chime in on this question. One of the first questions is, how would you define DE&I as it's known in corporate America today versus before the watershed moments of 2020? Andrea?
Thank you, Suleiman. Good afternoon, everyone. I am honored to be here with this esteemed panel, and happy to share some thoughts and actually learn some things as well. So I would define this moment in time for DE&I in corporate America no different than I would if you think about how diversity and inclusion evolved from affirmative action and regulatory compliance, if you will, around allowing women and people of color to even have opportunities in corporate America. When most of us really started thinking about diversity and inclusion, it was an offset of affirmative action. So affirmative action is, the regulatory process of allowing us to legally be in the place by laws, but inclusion is really including us into the process. The watershed moment for the George Floyd moment is no different than the next phase of the civil rights movement. So the 45th administration needed to happen for the nation to see what was really happening. The pandemic had to happen to pause America, and George Floyd's death had to happen for them to really see the lack of equity, police brutality that the African American community has always seen. And so the way that I would define it in corporate America was all those things were a combination of shifting the nation forward in looking at how we speak in terms of social justice, racial inequality in the realm of corporate America, because now we're having these conversations that we've never had before in HR, in our talent process. And it's not just the blanket diversity and inclusion. It is real words that we've never used in corporate America.
Thank you, Andrea. Dawn, would you like to chime in on that?
I would. And I'm also pleased to be here with Yvette and Andrea, and we'll learn probably more than I share. So thank you for the opportunity. I think very much what Andrea was saying is that, when we think about DEI now today, we are at that place for many firms, including my organization, that we're really focusing on equity. We've done a good job making people aware of the importance of diversity and all the dimensions that represents. I know my organization is focused very much on inclusion. I think that was where we needed to focus, just given the demographics of our organization, to really create that environment. We're at a place now, which I think is the harder work, but we now have more teeth. So 2020 actually helped us put teeth into this work in a way that, I wish we could have gotten there in a different way, but we, as Andrea said, this was all of the watershed moments, the pandemic, and then all of the things that followed. So that those teeth are really driving equity, really looking at systemic isms, whether we're talking racism or any of the isms, and really recognizing that it's not enough just to say our employees are aware and that we have ERGs, but what are we doing to dismantle, to really look at and then dismantle some of the things that perhaps organizations haven't been willing to do. And this is where the harder work is. So for me, when I think about DEI, and we added E to our office at the end of last year, like many organizations, it's now given me much more, as well as our leaders, energy to really do what I think now is the harder work to do. And I think corporate America is ready to do that. And in many ways will lead where some of the other parts of, of the world haven't. We think about the laws that corporate has pushed that have made change. And I think we're at that place. So when I think of the definition, I think about where we are. We are actually doing the harder work that is well overdue, but we're finally addressing that.
Dawn, you said something that was so profound. You said that the E gives it the energy, the teeth, and all I was thinking is it is the fuel, but it's the fuel that we need to have in the organization that supports the conversations and the hard work forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll go to Yvette, and I want to follow up really quickly, if you don't mind. I apologize.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, I think Andrea and Dawn, really covered it. The only thing that I'll add, for Citizens Bank specifically, because we've been really on this journey since we became public 5.5 years ago, and it's probably more 4 years that we've been focused on, that what that E kind of symbolizes is, much of the efforts that people have had as diversity officers or have really been in the space of culture and talent. Mm-hmm. And I think what the crisis, the economic crisis, the pandemic, the health crisis, and the social movement required us to say, there's injustice, not just in the workforce, but there's injustice in access to capital and access to healthcare. And so the teeth for us really symbolizes that today people are not just thinking about the workforce, although it is critical, but they're thinking about the products, the services, the channel, the segments of people that we're actually trying to reach out to. And for the first time, I have more work than I can do. I'm not pushing the story, this narrative up a hill. They're coming to me and they're actually driving that. And that to me is the real watershed moment.
Yeah. And I think you all brought up the E in diversity, equity, and inclusion, which was not part of the conversation in corporate America for many years. It was more in the nonprofit sector, higher learning. I'm curious, in your experience, and anyone kind of follow up on this question, how are you seeing this show up in corporate America? How are they making the case for equity and in the corporate space to make sure that they're also meeting shareholder expectations and but also driving change with the equity portion of DEI?
Well, I think Yvette hit on it when she talked about, like, it wasn't just around parity internally around jobs, it was the economics and the social determinants of it in our products and in our services. So I have like a couple of hats that I wear. I still run a PMO on the cable side of the company in Total Rewards, which is our benefits, and so products and services. And so we're looking at the social determinants of whether it's financial health, emotional health, and physical, medical wellness. And so you think in terms of how accessible are our products and services to our employees, and you look at the salaries, you look at employees that are in Mississippi and Alabama, and are our products accessible to them? Are we developing products that lacks the lens of equity and inclusion? So I honestly think that what has happened really has fueled our conversations, and it's not a hard sell, but it does take people like Dawn and Yvette and myself to be in the rooms to have those conversations. We still have to present and coordinate the information and present it to the leaders, and with a strategy to move the conversations forward, to have that part of the conversation embedded in the way we do business. It's not an ad hoc conversation anymore. We can never go back to that. The other thing is our shareholders are now, like, we're presenting when it's when we're having our quarterly reports to our shareholders and the analysts. It's oversight, whether it's required or not. Our shareholders are, it's visible now to our shareholders.
I love
just a comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you
go
want
ahead,
to go, Dawn?
go ahead, Yvette.
I think the term equality was used way back. I mean, I've been at this for a really longer than I'd like to say, right? So the term equality was around, which said, everybody has equal access to tools and resources, and so go get it. But the term equity means that you are making the accommodations, right, to make sure that you provide access, accommodating for where that group of people are, right, and how available that is. So I think that is the difference here, and actually shifting, that not everybody has equal access, not everybody has equal opportunity, and how are you adjusting? And to be quite honest, this is in line with what all companies are doing around personalization and segmentation. This is not new, but now the focus is, did you focus on this group of people based on race, gender, sexual orientation, where before it was a peanut butter broad brush and you didn't accommodate for those differences. And I think as Andrea said, now what's happening is that because of the George Floyd incident, which was very different, by the way, if I can say, from the Me Too event. The Me Too event, was also a watershed moment, but it didn't actually happen the way this happens, right? The Me Too was a group of women who decided these injustices have happened to me before, and I'm raising my hand. In this case, yes, there have been those injustices that happened before, but now we were seeing it live, happening every single day for a significant period of time on Instagram, on YouTube, on TV. It wasn't a documentary, it wasn't a movie, it wasn't a fictional story, it was real. And that, to me, what created the watershed moment not for our communities of color, but for the white community, right? Now those leaders said you cannot dispute the disparities in healthcare. You cannot dispute the disparities in terms of police brutality. So, I think that equity component and making adjustments is a critical distinction. And again, Dawn, is what creates the work. And for someone like myself, who, I have the honor to be able to have the power of the pen as I'm writing succession plans and how we actually develop our talent and how we educate them and how we move them around, it is, and I have diversity and inclusion as a part of my remit, allows me to weave that into the human capital agenda. And because I can influence, or, as Andrea said, sit at the table because I'm on the corporate strategy committee, I'm able to call the question, how are we leading our transformation? How are we doing our digital bank? How are we reaching our different segments? So we're in a really extraordinary place. And for all of you on the phone who are taking business leadership roles, you're in an extraordinary time where you should be thinking about not just your careers, but in your jobs, throughout your career, how do you architect the work that you do so that you're actually having the impact that you need to have to continue this agenda, so that it's not a one moment in time that we're going to forget about.
Yeah, I love all that's been said. I would say, what is exciting at Liberty, and I think both Andrea and Yvette have said, is that there are more people who recognize what this means. So, Suleiman, to answer your question, whether it's our board or whether it's our sustainability office, as they're looking at what investors are looking for, equity is really driving this. We're an insurance organization. We insure other entities, other organizations. It is allowing us to think about how we set rate, how we think about the people we insure, and is there equity in terms of how we are delivering security and protection for all people, or just some? And do we need to revisit, how we set those rates? So it is, be careful what you wish for. This is exactly what we would hope, that it would get outside of just thinking about how we hire, about our talent management practices, which are pretty, critical. And at the same time, it is beyond the walls, of Liberty. It's how do we think about the communities that we serve, where we live, where we work, our customers. And it is having a lot of people really revisit diversity and inclusion in a different way, which is exactly what we would hope. But I would say right now, there are people who are saying, oh, equity, oh, good, finally, we're going to be included in terms of access. There are others who are saying, oh, good, we're going to be fair. And what is really interesting is really help people really unpack and understand this is hard work.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And Dawn, you started down this road. Love to go to Andrea and ask, how is Comcast specifically? How are your companies specifically? How has DE&I been rebranded kind of post 2020? And where is the status of those commitments today?
Right. So, so if you think about Comcast, it's pretty large. We started out as a cable company. So Comcast is the parent company. You've got the cable division, where we've been doing this work for more than maybe 15 years. We acquired NBC Universal. They've been doing this work for quite some time. Spectacor is the sports and entertainment and gaming division, not so much. And then we acquired Sky Media, which is the equivalent to Direct TV over in the UK. So Comcast and NBC Universal, longstanding, work that we've been doing. We have the External Joint Diversity Council with civil rights signatories who, provide oversight. And not just civil rights signatories. We've got women. We've got women, external counsel, LGBT, veterans, people with disabilities. The whole gamut. We've been doing that very well. With a focus initially really on equality, as Dawn has said. Everybody was talking about, equality, and Yvette said it really well, like providing equal access. But the equity piece, have we took into account that everyone has had equal access, that we're there, but have we taken into account all of the barriers that were in place, systemic barriers? And it was, again, George Floyd's life being taken, and the consistent ongoing of the police brutality that people were seeing now because of this pandemic. So that's a very different conversation that's happening even at the highest level of the organization. And what it has precipitated is, the chairman put out this commitment of $100 million funding for multi-years, he and 299 other CEOs, which was led by the Walton family, the Walmart CEO, saying, we've got to do something about this. And so this was a public commitment, and specifically around social injustice and racial inequality. The Black Lives Matter movement signed on, and it was, he made a commitment for the corporation and internally in the corporation. He didn't ask for consensus. It is the direction that we're going, period. Now, Spectacor was a division that has not been brought under that umbrella, and nor was Sky in the UK. Since then, Sky in the UK has now hired their first chief diversity officer, again, bringing them under the umbrella. And then I was promoted to the role for Spectacor. In Spectacor, we have hockey operations, the Wells Fargo Center, events and entertainment, and then we have esports and gaming. And so, esports, the president of esports will tell you, gaming is the great equalizer. So their culture is pretty progressive around inclusion. Where we have opportunities, there is like misogynistic behavior in the virtual environment. So that's a whole other thing that we're working with. But hockey operations is where we have really the real opportunity. The tagline for the Flyers is hockey is for everyone. And that environment, we've not seen everyone included in that environment. So my role there is, all of the verticals that we focus on under the umbrella of DEI, community engagement, supplier diversity, workforce, and then governance and reporting. And I am, and so where we are in Spectacor is probably about where we were with Comcast 10 or 12 years ago. And the leadership is ready. They are ready. They were like, we're waiting for you. And so where we are now is in the foundational stages of building what is our current state, what we want our future state to be, and building our baseline just really around workforce practices, what's the culture. And we will have to take them through a cultural transformation, but they're not kicking and screaming. It is, the case has been made. And so, operationally, there will be roadblocks. So there's, not saying that there's, a bed of roses and flowers and unicorns and rainbows, but because all of those things take time, but it's no consensus building. That is the expectation for the organization.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Yvette?
Yeah, similar, I would say, obviously we're a bank. We did, our CEO also, shortly after this event, put out a commitment that was really a $10 million commitment in addition to what was already our base commitments in terms of providing funds for loans to build housing, to provide small businesses with grants and or funding. And obviously during the pandemic, we were participated in the PPP program, which obviously helped to support and keep many small businesses alive. In addition to that, we also provided grants to specifically minority businesses, which we are doing a portion of that yet again this year, to ensure that those businesses could continue to be viable in this economic environment. In addition, we provided, in partnership with another organization, mentorship around how to sustain your business. For those individuals, and there was quite a few people who started businesses right in the middle of this. So there was support, for mentorship and a kind of a ongoing support to help them stay enthusiastic about their decisions and help them think through about how to digitize it to the extent that they didn't, because they obviously don't have the same funds as, middle market companies. So we did a lot of work with small businesses. We also took the time to invest dollars in organizations that were really focused on these social efforts. So we obviously redirected, funds to organizations like the 100 Black Men, the Posse Foundation, UNCF. So all organizations that actually are aligned to our particular mission around ensuring that we are educating those in the workforce, and in particular with a focus on people of color, women and people of color. So we created partnerships with Black Girls Who Code, because we are knowing that we need to leapfrog in the area of STEM roles, right? And then how do we bring them along? So we took an opportunity to create a whole series of partnerships and fund them. And for our nonprofits, which are about 180 nonprofits that we deal with today, we knew that they too had to educate themselves around what was happening. And so we actually began a convening process with all of those nonprofits and actually paid for their education around this space so that they could be well versed as they were managing through the pandemic and the social justice issues, and were able to kind of look at themselves and say, how do we, first break through our issues so that we can help the constituents that we're working with today. And then, of course, many of the things that Andrea talked about, we accelerated our learning journeys. And obviously a big part of what we're trying to do, we had already embarked on an audit, on a bias audit of our talent, of our human capital systems. And we accelerated that. And the good news is that we pretty much did okay in architecting many of our talent management practices. But what we know is that the execution of those practices we have to lean into it and remove the bias of the decisions that we make. So you can have a great process, but if the mindsets and the belief systems don't get you to a fair, and I'll use that word deliberately, an equitable kind of process or thinking, then you're going to be in the same exact place. So we've accelerated all of our learning with the focus of, having people understand, how do you have this narrative? How do you have these conversations? What does bias looks like? What does it look like when you're hiring and you're interviewing? What does it look like when you're giving out work? What does it look like when you're creating a succession plan? So how do you prevent it from creeping up in your performance review discussion? So that's the work we're in the midst of doing and helping the organization to move. And there's a whole host of things, and I want to make sure I give Dawn a minute to respond. But I think we're moving in progress, and we're learning as we're going, and we're testing as we're going, and we're in uncharted territory. And so I think this is really a test case, for all of us to really understand what's working given where people's hearts and minds are today.
Thank you, Yvette. Dawn?
I would just, echo many of the things that you've heard Yvette and Andrea share. We have done as well. I mean, our CEO has been very public in commitment. We also put money behind the commitment. We have a foundation, Liberty Mutual, and so the Liberty Mutual Foundation that's in Boston, but supports really globally the communities where we work and where our employees live. Additional millions, I think at least 10 plus, to be able to support, because we knew COVID was just wreaking havoc with those who are most vulnerable. And so we had board support to increase our support for those organizations and made it very easy for them to even access it. So they weren't jumping lots of hoops. And we too, given all that was going on this year, knew that we had the opportunity and it was needed to, if you will, kind of double down on all the things that we had been doing. One of the things I'll mention, just so I'm not repeating, is that in the midst of all of this going on, and when we looked at our demographic, we knew that as we talk about this work, that we needed to ensure that everyone felt that they were included in this work. Liberty Mutual is, been around for a long time. As we look at our demographics, it is no surprise that the majority of the employees are white, and many of them are white males. And when you think about 2020, and you think about, again, such a challenging year with the election, we recognize that, at least if I focus just in the US, that Liberty Mutual probably did reflect many of what we were seeing on TV. Again, we could not assume that everybody was in the same place politically. So in addition to dealing with all that we were dealing with, we were also needing to really drive the message that when we talked about this work, we were including everyone in the conversation. And so some of the initiatives that haven't been mentioned for us were around really having some hard conversations with our white men, helping them not go into a ditch and feel like they didn't have a role in this place, but really helping them understand that in order for them to continue to be successful in the organization, that there's some work to be done. It was really a reinforcement of the messages that we have been sharing around why it's important to be an inclusive leader, that is the definition of leadership at Liberty. So we piloted a couple of different ways to be able to address some of our senior leadership in different parts of the organization to determine, how we could bring them along. And I will say we still are doing that work. We did create a program that will continue this year because we know in order to do this work, we need these men to be part of the solution. We need them to be part of how we move forward. And it has been, I think, even more necessary as we've been focusing more on representation, increasing representation of our women and people of color. It's been even more important as we, for the very first time, announced goals, shared our data in ways that we had not before. We're a private organization. We're not a federal contractor. There are certain things that we did not have to do in the past, but because of a need for greater transparency to really drive greater accountability, we chose to do different this year. And all of that pressure, what happens? You put more pressure into a system, it will go somewhere. And we wanted to make sure that that was being addressed in a healthy way. And then again, focusing on our white male leadership to help them be part of this is one of the ways that we believe we will move forward as we drive greater equity.
Great, thank you, Dawn. And I'll start with Yvette on this one, and then we'll go to Andrea. Yvette, I know in your work, CRA, I'm sure influences some of the work that you do, but now ESG is a hot topic, environmental, social, and governance. It's being more highly scrutinized by the investment community. I'm curious how you see ESG influencing the investment community and how it influences the work that you do as a talent leader.
Yeah. So, for sure, we have just started our work. As I said, we've been, while we've been a company that was a part of Royal Bank of Scotland several years ago, we were just a public company 5.5 years ago, and much of our ESG work actually has just started. But having said that, I think that the focus on ESG, and we're seeing it, with our investor community, the disclosures that are being required, all the things that Dawn had talked about, disclosures in our proxy, in our annual report. And I think that the DE&I space is a part of that S, right, of that component of the ESG work. And you're seeing not just, I, for example, go to the board twice a year on this topic of diversity, right? And it's the comp committee and the full board. And so there's that we get our investors are always sending inquiries. And I think for those individuals who are not moving or creating a roadmap to disclosure, they will be forced, you know, by the workforce, by the investor community. They're being much more discriminate about how they're testing for it, as is the board, you know. And so I think it's going to be an increasingly important dialogue, and not just from a workforce point of view, but in terms of how you distribute your products and your services as well. And so I think, you know, we can expect that it will be something that will become much more of a vigilant activity by investors, by boards, by analysts, and certainly from the upcoming generation of workforce.
Thank you. Andrew, like to chime in on that?
Yes, well, we've had an Office of Sustainability for probably like the last 8 to 10 years. Started with Brett Perkins and ran by, we have a Chief Sustainability Officer that reports into Brian Roberts' office. So we've been doing that kind of all along. And again, much like Dawn saying that we are a private company, so it's not government regulated or anything, but we think about how you dispose of, reducing that carbon, that carbon footprint and things like that. Our buildings, both of the buildings are LEED buildings, in the city. So I think we're doing pretty well.
Awesome. Dawn, like to chime in on that?
So unlike Comcast, we just stood up our Office of Sustainability in 2019. And we are very much a big part of that S. So work very closely with the Chief Sustainability Officer and his team. And, again, going back to equity, the conversations are really interesting in a different way, and actually is helping propel the work that I started 8 years ago at Liberty. When I started in 2013, that's where the 13 came from. Because at the time when I, shared with them the framework for this work, it was very much both internal and external. It was really, including our customers, but also our investors. It was really thinking. But at the time, I think people could only focus on talent. That's all they saw. And so now fast forward, here we are. And now the different parts of the business are really thinking, wow, yes, investors are asking. I'm going to these calls and suddenly they need more update on the DEI efforts and what we're doing, and being asked to apply a DEI lens in places that they hadn't thought about before. So we are earlier stage than some other companies, but we are making huge traction. We are a global organization, so there are parts of the world that are ahead because of the regulatory requirements in that space, and that's also pushing us here in the United States, where the UK and other places they have been further ahead. So again, I will say one of the things I'm incredibly proud of my company is because they recognize, that one person or even 3 cannot do this DEI work alone. They have continued to make investments in the DEI office. So I just hired 8 people in the last 2 months, 3 subject matter expert VPs to align to our core businesses, because they recognize that this is so much a strategic imperative for us to be successful. And they have put their money, or at least their resources, behind me being able to do that. So that has really helped us move forward.
Great. And I think you all kind of talked about this new talent community, and there's a transfer of wealth that's happening as we speak right now. You have Generation Y, you have Generation Z. Soon there'll be a majority of the workforce. I think the number is $35 trillion that'll transfer to that community as well. When you think about how they're evaluating companies, and is that you talked about the S and ESG, I think around DEI. How would you give advice to that next generation on how to evaluate how DEI practices are happening in organizations, and how to evaluate effectiveness for their own job aspirations as well as their investment aspirations of the future?
I'll jump in. Can I start?
Sure, please.
And then I'll absolutely pass it over. I mean, I think there are a couple of ways, and I just think about how we're being successful right now as we are attracting or hiring talent. And that is really creating the opportunity for people to talk with our people. So we can put out the best statements, have the greatest sites. I think that's important. You want to look at those, absolutely. You want to read our ESG report. You want to look at what those things are out there, do your homework. But I also think you want to talk to the people who are actually living it every day. And so whether that's as you're interviewing, asked to be talking with some of the ERG leadership or members, so you can hear, what things are happening and what things are still opportunities. There's no perfect place. I think we would all agree everybody still has opportunity to get stronger and better, but I do think that is absolutely helpful. And the other thing I would say is that more services like Glassdoor and others are creating opportunities for you to be able to go and see what people are saying. One data point is not enough, but there are other ways that you can also look to see what is the reputation of X company in terms of what they say they're doing versus what they are actually doing. So I just throw that out as some opportunities.
Thank you, Dawn. Andrea?
Well, the National Black MBAA, when I was leading workforce diversity for Comcast, that was our spot. And we would always bring our executives to the conference and have an executive salon. And so that we would have our leaders meet the talent at the conference. And one of the ways that, Dawn touched on it, it's great to have websites, it's great to have, information there, but, we've kind of upped our game a little bit in having real job previews on our websites in the sections if you're looking for those opportunities. We have, diverse slates where people can, make sure that we're interviewing a diverse slate, but there is nothing like having a real conversation with an individual, whether it's an ERG leader or a person in the role. But I go back to those executive salons we would have at the national conference. It is having the opportunity for an individual to say, can I speak to a leader in the organization? Can I speak to a member who's been there or an employee there, and have those one-on-ones? And we're doing that now in a virtual environment. I remember one of our leaders in corporate development said, it is a buyer's market for talent, because every employee is one URL, like a click away from their next opportunity. And these young folks now, nobody wants to work like their parents or grandparents 10 years and 20 years in one place and riding, climbing the corporate ladder. It was like, yeah, I want your job, and I want it like in 3 years. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me how you're going to get there. So it is that ability to have that one-on-one engagement, and they can assess it with all the tools that you put out there. But these folks are smart. You're an entrepreneur, soul. You know.
I do.
Yeah.
Either.
I mean, I agree. The only thing that I would add, to get very specific, right, because it is the power of the conversation, right, and how many people are consistent in their dialogue with you. But if I were to give you a cheat sheet about what to ask, right, I'll reverse the conversation, given what I know we do is, inspect what you want. So inspect what are the characteristics of the culture and give me the evidence. How do you measure that feeling of equity and that inclusion, and what does it say? And ask the recruiters, ask the people to tell you what that story is. What is that narrative? And I would say that, obviously a part of the equity component really resides, as a member of the workforce, not as a customer, but as a member of the workforce. It's really around how you're going to experience much of the human capital processes that exist. So asking questions relative to, how do you recruit? How do you know that you're actually having equity and equal opportunity? What are your demographics? So inspect, the board demographics, the senior leader demographic, and then ask the questions, how is that happening? Right? Is it happening because you're hiring them? Is it happening because you're promoting them? What are the barriers to success? Ask the tough questions, empower yourself to do that.
I love that. Inspect what you expect.
Well, not just that. It's Yvette said it. She's like, you are interviewing them just as much as they are
That's
interviewing
right.
you. So don't hand over your power to identify what you want next in an opportunity.
Yeah. And I'll just add one other thing, right? Because this is a very powerful organization with a ton of smart people. And wherever you are, wherever you land, right? The other question you should ask is, what is the appetite for the person in that role that you're seeking to actually change the business strategy, right? To create new ways of reaching, diverse segments, creating new products that are specific. What is the appetite and the opportunity to do that? Because I would hope that all of us here in this room today, in this virtual room, are not only seeking to advance, but seeking to climb and lift along the way and remove the barriers, because of course, too much is given, much is expected. So my hope is that when you inspect so that you could do good too.
Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and we are right on time for our question and answer session. It's been a pleasure for me to have this dialogue with you, and I'm going to turn it over to Sierra to lead the question and answers.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I've been taking really, really good notes this whole time, a lot of really helpful information. Just one thing, I am currently an investor relations professional, but a prior Comcaster working in the community impact team. So I can attest to a lot of the things Andrea was mentioning. And I believe just yesterday, I think Comcast posted a status update on the $100 million commitment that Brian Roberts made back in June. So I recommend everyone to check that out. It's really nice to see all the work that Comcast does there. So we are going to open it up to Q&A. We do have a few questions. So I'm going to turn it over to my board member, Christina, who is going to read off some of those questions.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Okay. The first question I have is, I have a question for the panel. Sorry. With the renewed energy around DEI, there's a lot of discussion and action of many of the leaders in corporations right now. What do you recommend employees, external stakeholders, shareholders, etc., continue to do to hold leaders accountable to the goals and promises they have made going forward?
So I'll start. That's a very good question. And I would say for any individual that is looking for those answers is to hold them accountable, be diligent, make sure that you understand what their priorities are, be disciplined about what you understand, what they committed, and then ask the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Andrea. I think that there needs to be some demonstrated proof. And so that may be very different for how the board holds folks accountable from the senior leadership or employees. I know for us, we are committing to be more transparent with updates on our data. And so we've committed that, and there's a way in which we're doing that and updating that across the organization, an internal website. So we are basically telling people what we're going to do, and we're asking them to hold us accountable to delivering on that. So I absolutely agree. I mean, you put things in place, and just like anything else, you hold people accountable to achieving that or explaining why not. Because, obviously sometimes, this work doesn't happen overnight. And so what you want to see, yes, is results, but you also want to see effort. And recognize that it's going to take some time, some trial and error, because some of these things are incredibly complex and you don't unravel them overnight.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the only thing I'll add to that, just a quick comment, which is, I think that as a general matter, at least at Citizens, we are trying to push people to have, aspirational goals, right? And so, there is this hope that people will push themselves, but also be realistic. And so I think what Dawn mentioned about, there are reasons why sometimes you don't hit your targets or you don't hit the approach simply because the world is moving on and things are changing and iterating. But I would definitely, do your part in holding yourself and the people around you accountable to the commitments that they're making.
Right, Yvette, that's the thing that you hit on it, is if you're going to hold someone else accountable, then you need to be disciplined about yourself and what you make sure that you understand what their priorities are. Make sure that you've taken copious notes about what their priorities are. And as you follow up, don't be the one to say, well, you said you was going to do this, and then just start throwing rocks. Be disciplined and diligent about their cause, and that you focused on what they said that they were going to deliver, and that you have your notes and your proof that you're following it, because it's just as important to you as well.
That's right.
Okay. Just a quick reminder for individuals, if you have questions, please make sure that you enter them into the Q&A, not necessarily the chat. We may not see them right away if they're in the chat. The next question that we have is, how would you advise companies who are developing ERGs, and what are some key factors?
I'll jump in here. Our ERGs are fairly new, given the tenure of our office. We have currently 6 ERGs, employee resource groups. We're adding a 7th in about 2 months. What I would say is you very much want to have a structure. You really want to define the mission, what they are and what they are not. At Liberty, because we're a much more formal organization, we do have a pretty structured structure for our ERGs. We have definitions, we have executive sponsors who are from the business who lead each of them. So there's a leadership model. There are budgets. This is work that we believe is part of what helps Liberty move forward. So you really want to look at, again, what is the purpose? Be really clear about the objective, and where there are opportunities for influence and where they're not. Being very clear. I think that sets everybody up for success and not confusion. Without that, you may be just creating groups of folks who come together, and that may be okay too. But I think you just really want to be clear, especially if you're putting, as we have, money behind it and a structure and time. You really want to be clear about what the objectives are and what your structure is in terms of how they interact with other parts of the organization.
The format that we have is very similar to what Dawn described. What I would add is that in our case, we actually called them business resource groups, because we wanted to make sure that the business knew they were extension of the business, not of HR, and they're not like a hanging network, right? And that what they're doing is actually addressing the most pressing issues of the business. And so in our structure that we've architected, which is consistent across all of our 6 BRGs, there's a group of people focused on colleagues, there's a group of people focused on customers, and a group of people focused on communities. And that has been very effective in ensuring that as we look at the like groups, whether they're veterans or disabled or people with special abilities, or they're the Black community, the Hispanic community, that there's an angle, the stakeholder angle is applied to the efforts that they have. And again, we don't want them creating stealth HR organizations or running their own products and services. What they're there is to be an extension of the business, and the business does in fact use them.
Right. So in ours, we really thought, when we launched ours really was for the employees, with the employees, and by the employees. And so we call ours employee resource groups, and we established them on the 4C model. It's career, culture, community, and commerce. And so the way that we engage and they're all fully funded. We have 8 of them, and they're across the entire enterprise. And we really think our employees are our greatest assets. And so we focused on them, having them as employee resource groups, and either the chairman's direct reports at headquarters, or one of his, or the chairman's direct report is the executive sponsor. So we have a very high level executive, and then someone that is a direct report to them is another executive sponsor. We purposely have someone that is in the group and another leader that is not in the group that's an executive sponsor as well. And there are leaders within each of those groups that co-leads those groups. Now, in the commerce group, we've done a lot of things. Our employees have broken the Xfinity app, working with the engineers to break the app to create the next version of it. We have curated the next season of the fall season of what's coming out on NBC with the folks on the Xfinity platform. You know, so we do call them employee resource groups. And I can see, you know, for a banking institution, it does make more sense to align them with, you know, business, because that may be what resonates with your business. So it depends on the culture, but it's the same premise. Align it with something that's going to be more value added to the organization.
Andrea, we're exactly where, I mean, we call them employee resource groups. I would say we're moving towards BRGs. We also use the 4C model as well in order to make sure that, you know, it is holistic. And we think of our employees being our greatest asset. They are part of the business. We too have executive leadership. We want an ally as well as someone who is from that, you know, affinity, if you will. And they're open to everyone, and we really drive that. And they have been honestly the source of great education and comfort, especially in 2020, to helping move the whole organization
in
forward.
Learning. Yeah, our tagline is, you don't have to be, and so everyone's a part of it. And one other thing that that you touched upon about having our white male colleagues being part of the conversation, when the George Floyd thing hit, you know, most of our very senior executives are the folks that are leading a lot of the work. They were part of our listening tour for our employees, all employees, about how they were impacted by the George Floyd murder. And they learned a lot on this listening tour as well.
Yeah, no, we have it's not an ERG, but we have an initiative called our Men as Allies initiative, and it's open to all men and women, as long as you bring a man to the conversation. And at the same time, because of where we are right now, and the majority of our white men really looking for a way to understand their role as we go forward with a real focused press on increasing representation for women and people of color, it has been a really huge help to convene, you know, these leaders together so that they can support each other, but also to move forward and be the best allies they can in this effort. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for responding to the questions, and thank you for those who were able to, you know, provide questions for us. I'm now going to pass it back to Sierra to close us out.
Hi, so those were really good questions, and I know that there's a few more in here, but because we are short on time, I want to advise everyone to definitely reach out to us on LinkedIn with any feedback or questions that you have. I thank you, Andrea, Dawn, and Yvette, and I know Yvette had to jump off for another meeting, but I am so appreciative to your time today. You gave us a lot of great knowledge on this topic that's so growing. Like I mentioned, I'm in investor relations, so this is a topic that has been all over the place, and I love it. I love that it's really bringing these two worlds together as it should. So I appreciate all of this knowledge, and I hope everyone got out of it the same. I do want to point out, we do have an event in March coming up, March 20th. It will be for Women's Month. It is the Art of Executive Presence. So keep a lookout on our social media platforms. And I hope everyone has and enjoys the rest of their afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.